Chapter 6: Primitive and Modernized North American Indians. Nature has shown a large-scale demonstration in the Americas of how a single racial stock can adapt to climates ranging from the torrid jungles of the tropics to the Arctic regions. The American Indian race appears to have originated from a common ancestry and arrived in America from Asia via the Bering Strait, according to anthropologists. In recent times, a Russian engineer crossed from Asia to America over the pack ice of the Bering Sea, covering a distance of 90 miles if this is possible today. It's likely that similar crossings were feasible during earlier periods, such as after the last ice age or even earlier. The American Indian provides an exceptional opportunity to study both their adaptability to diverse environments and the variations that different environments can produce within a single racial group. The Indians today are not generally like the original inhabitants at the time of Columbus's discovery of America, as demonstrated by skeletal remains and early records. Our study aimed to locate and examine groups of the original American Indian stock, if still existing, who lived in accordance with their traditions and had minimal influence from white man's contact, particularly their foods. Despite initial skepticism, such groups do still exist in vast unexplored areas of the American continent. To find Indians least affected by contact with the white man, especially their foods, I traveled to northern Canada, specifically to the region inside the Rocky Mountain Range to study the Indians of northern British Columbia and the Yukon Territory. Since using an airplane was impractical due to the lack of fuel supplies for the return trip, and the Mackenzie River water route was not feasible for a round trip in one season, we chose a route that entered the territory from Alaska via the Stikine River, a major waterway that cuts through the Coast and Cascade Ranges and originates in the western watershed of the Rockies. Our goal was to reach a group of Indians who did not have access to marine animals or running salmon, as these fish do not enter the Arctic waterways. We used a specially designed river transport capable of navigating rapids on the Stikine River to Telegraph Creek, the limit of navigation during the short summer season, where large quantities of modern foods are stored for winter exchange for furs. At Telegraph Creek, we chartered a truck to cross the Rocky Mountain Divide to the headwaters of rivers flowing north to the Arctic. At this outpost, we engaged guides and chartered a high-powered scow to travel down the rivers toward the Arctic, specifically the Dease and Liard rivers. In the summer of 1933, we made contact with large bands of Indians who had come from the Pelly Mountain country to exchange furs at the Hudson Bay Company outpost. Most of Canada's Indians are under treaty with the Canadian government, which provides an annual per capita bounty, encouraging them to come to designated centers with their families to collect it. However, this treaty was never signed by the Indians of British Columbia and the Yukon Territory, so they remain nomadic tribes following the moose and caribou herds in search of food. Their diet is almost entirely wild game, as the rigorous winters, with temperatures reaching 70 degrees below zero, preclude the possibility of maintaining dairy animals or growing seed cereals or fruits. Despite these challenges, the Indians have developed remarkable skills in living comfortably with their rugged environment and limited variety of foods. Their cabins, built with skill in woodcraft, are designed to be warm and protected from sub-zero temperatures. They plan ahead by storing provisions and firewood, emphasizing their strong community spirit. Living in grizzly bear country, they capture many of these animals with baited pitfalls, and their knowledge of using different organs and tissues of animals to defend against certain degenerative diseases is impressive. When asked why they do not get scurvy, an old Indian explained that it is a disease of the white man, and the Indians prevent it by eating specific parts of moose, particularly the adrenal glands, which are rich in vitamin C. We found these Indians to be cooperative and hospitable, aiding us in our study. They had strong senses of honor, leaving their cabins unlocked and valuables in plain sight. Many of the women had never seen a white woman until our visit. Their teeth, dental arches, and facial forms were in superb condition. In several groups, we found not a single tooth had ever been affected by tooth decay. As we returned to more civilized areas, dental caries increased progressively, reaching 25.5% of all teeth examined at Telegraph Creek, the point of contact with white man's foods. In our journey down the Stikine River towards the Alaskan frontier towns, the problem of dental decay worsened to affect 40% of all teeth. We made careful inquiries into the presence of arthritis among the more isolated groups. In these remote areas, we neither saw nor heard of any cases. However, upon reaching areas with modern foods, many cases emerged, including 10 bedridden individuals among about 20 Indian homes. Other afflictions also appeared here, particularly tuberculosis, which was taking a severe toll on children born in this area. 2 typical cases of tubercular involvement of neck glands are shown in Figure 16. The suffering caused by tooth decay was distressing. There were no dentists or doctors within hundreds of miles to relieve their pain. The physiques of the Indians in the far north who still lived in isolated areas and followed their accumulated wisdom were remarkable. Practically no irregular teeth, including no impacted third molars, were seen. All individuals old enough to have erupted molars had them standing in position and functioning normally for chewing. The excellence of their dental arches is shown in Figure 17. Where Indians consumed white man's food, tooth decay was severe, as shown in Figure 18. In the new generation, after they encountered white civilization and adopted its foods, many developed crooked teeth and deformed dental arches, as seen in Figure 19. We also met representatives of relatively isolated primitive Indian groups in the district south of Hudson Bay. These groups were reached by a newly projected railroad extending eastward and northward from Winnipeg, Manitoba. This brought us into contact with Indians who came down from the waterways draining into Hudson Bay and as far north as James Bay. They had come to exchange their furs for ammunition, blankets, etc., and this contact occurred only once or twice a year. It was quite impossible for them to carry back enough of the white man's food to have a significant influence on their diet for the entire year. They still lived on the wild game of the land. Like those in the northern country, their principal large animals were moose. These were treaty Indians, and many of them came out to this frontier to obtain the government bounty, obliging them to bring their families. The bounty here amounted to $5 per head, a considerable income in exchange for blankets and other equipment. Some of these contact points were at the height of the land dividing the waters running north and east to James Bay and Hudson Bay, or south to Lake Superior. This historic country had been the meeting ground of tribes from the northern waters with those from the Great Lakes District, where many battles had been fought. For comparison with these more primitive groups from the Hudson and James Bay watersheds, we had the opportunity to study families that had settled along the railroad or in its vicinity to benefit from exchanging furs for modern white man's food. This provided us with an excellent opportunity to study the effects of the modern diet, as shown in Figure 20. This Indian and his wife had built their bodies before encountering the white man. He was about 6 feet tall. Both parents had splendid dental arches and well-formed faces. His teeth are shown in Figure 20. Their 2 children in the photograph were born after adopting the white man's food brought in by the railroad. Both were mouth breathers with narrow dental arches and marked underdevelopment of the middle third of the face. The older girl had tuberculosis. Another adult man is shown in Figure 20. Like the generation he represents, he had exceptionally fine dental arches and a well-developed face. Here we found many of the younger generation suffering from tuberculosis or crippled with arthritis. Two such cases are shown in Figure 21. To further compare the more isolated and more highly modernized groups, we studied the Indians in the largest single Indian reservation in Canada, located at Brantford, Ontario. This group comprised approximately 4,700 Indians living under highly modernized conditions provided by the Canadian government. They lived on very fertile land in close proximity to a modern Canadian city. Each head of a family was provided with a tract of land from which they usually had an income sufficient to afford an automobile. They were able to buy not only necessities and comforts according to modern white man's standards, but also many luxuries. The government provided a well-administered hospital and staff. When I asked the director of this hospital, Dr. Davis, about the principal use of the hospital at that time, he said that the demand for beds had completely changed in the 28 years he had been there. The principal services requested in 1933 related to maternity problems. He stated that in his period of contact he had seen 3 generations of mothers. The grandmothers of the present generation would take a shawl and either alone or accompanied by one family member retire to the bush and give birth to the baby, then return with it to the cabin. It was a problem of little difficulty or concern. He stated that today the young mothers of this last generation are brought to his hospital, sometimes after they have been in labor for days. They were entirely different from their grandmothers, or even mothers in their capacity and efficiency in the matter of reproduction. He stated that that morning he had encountered 2 cases in which surgical intervention was necessary to enable birth. Here we had an opportunity to study the effects of modernization. Indians were avid sports fans, particularly of their national game, lacrosse. We were able to witness one of these matches with a team from another reservation. Indian families arrived in modern automobiles, dressed in modern clothes, and bought soda, candy, and modern sweets at typical confection stands. These were highly modernized Indians. The group on this reservation, comprising approximately 4,700 Indians, belonged to the following tribes: Mohawks, Onondagas, Cayugas, Senecas, Oneidas, and Delawares, making up the Six Nation or Iroquois group. A later addition to this group was the Tuscaroras from the Carolinas. While there were many mixed bloods, there were also a goodly number of full-blooded Indian families, providing an opportunity to study, comparatively, the effects of the intermingling of Indians with whites. As in previous investigations, a special effort was made to study children from 8 to 16 years of age. For example, boys and girls selected from a training school called Mohawk Institute, near the city of Brantford, represented one type of environment. There were approximately 160 students under training, and we were informed that they studied half a day and worked half a day. Boys were taught craftsmanship and farming, girls home economics and garment making, and such practical training as would prepare them for future homemaking. While most of the boys and girls came from that reservation, a few were accepted from other reservations. It is of interest that 77% of the children in this institution had suffered from dental caries, and that 17% of all the teeth examined had already been attacked by dental caries. However, this apparently occurred before their admission to the institute, as we did not find a single case of active caries among those examined, which is particularly important in connection with their excellent nutrition. The institute maintained a fine dairy herd and provided fresh vegetables, whole wheat bread, and limited sugar and white flour. Children from this group were compared with children of approximately the same age in a public school on the reservation, where it was found that 90% had suffered from dental caries, and currently, in 70% of the cases, the caries was apparently active. It is important to note that in this group, 28.5% of all teeth examined had already been attacked by dental caries. A study was made of patients at the reservation hospital, where all kinds of services were provided free of charge. We found that 83% had suffered from dental caries, and that 23.2% of all teeth had already been attacked by caries. We were particularly interested in the conditions in the homes, especially among mothers. A typical young mother had approximately half of her teeth attacked by dental caries, as had her 7-year-old son. The middle third of his face was underdeveloped, and all of his upper anterior teeth were decayed to the gum line. A study was conducted on an Indian reservation in New York State to compare and estimate the typical modern American Indian life in terms of dental caries and nutrition. The study visited a band of 450 people in the Tuscarora Reservation northeast of Niagara Falls. The timing was fortunate, as it coincided with Decoration Day, and events like a lacrosse match and a baseball game between Indian and white teams from nearby towns were scheduled. Several hundred Indians had gathered to showcase their best attire, transportation, and physical abilities. The older, less modernized Indians displayed similar facial features, while many of the more modern individuals showed noticeable deficiencies in facial development. A typical mother with 4 children was studied at her home. Her teeth were severely affected by dental caries, with some teeth having gold inlays and others having untreated roots. She had 20 teeth with active cavities. Her 4-year-old daughter already had 12 severely decayed teeth, her 8-year-old daughter had 16, and her 10-year-old son had 6. The husband was bedridden due to acute lung issues, likely tuberculosis. During the visit, the children were eating their noon meal, which consisted of white bread and stewed vegetables, with only the small baby being given milk. In this Tuscarora group, 83% of those examined had dental caries, and 38% of all teeth had been affected by cavities. Everyone in the reservation was consuming white flour products, with minimal or no milk. Previously, the Indians had grown wheat and kept cows to provide natural cereals and milk for their families, but this practice had been discontinued in recent years. Now, they were purchasing white flour and canned vegetables, and using commercial vegetable fats, jams, marmalades, syrups, and confections liberally. Children were adopting modern civilization sweets at an early age. To further understand modernized Indians in North America, a study was conducted in a reservation on Winnipeg Lake in Manitoba. These people, living north and east of Winnipeg, were highly modernized. They had fertile lands and were taught modern farming methods, and their proximity to well-stocked fishing waters offered opportunities to obtain fish, similar to their ancestors. Despite having a government school, a government agent, access to hospitals, and modern medical services, their physical condition was poor. Dental caries affected 39.1% of all teeth studied, and over 90% of individuals had rampant dental caries. They mainly consumed imported white flour, jams, canned vegetables, and sugar. The study also examined Pacific Coast Indians to understand the impact of seafood. Historical evidence from the Vancouver Museum showed prehistoric Indian skulls with well-formed teeth and no dental caries. Modern Indians in North Vancouver, living with modern conveniences and foods, had 36.9% of their teeth affected by dental caries. Victoria's Craigflower Indian Reservation on Vancouver Island was also studied. Although these Indians had received new land, houses, and money, and had become modern with cars and other luxuries, 48.5% of all teeth examined had been affected by dental caries. Their diet was similar to that of most modern people, consisting of white flour products, sweet foods, and pastries. Ketchikan, Alaska, known for its abundance of edible seafood, including the oalakan or candlefish, showed that 46.6% of all teeth examined in an Indian settlement had been affected by dental caries. Many homes had individuals suffering from tuberculosis or arthritis. In Anchorage, Alaska, a city combining coastal retail and wholesale activities, a government hospital treated many Eskimos and Indians, with 39.1% of all teeth examined having dental caries. Sitka, with its historical Russian influence, had modernized and primitive Indian groups with dental caries affecting 40% of all teeth. The study highlighted the challenges faced by modern Indians in maintaining traditional diets rich in seafood, instead adopting white flour, sugar, and canned vegetables. Despite access to fresh seafood, the convenience of purchasing modern foods had led to high rates of dental caries and poor physical health among modernized Indian populations. Dr. Romig provided valuable information that aligns with the current understanding of how modernization affects health. He mentioned that in his 36 years of working with these people, he had never seen a case of cancer among truly primitive Eskimos and Indians, though it's common once they adopt modern ways. Similarly, acute surgical issues like gallbladder, kidney, stomach, and appendix problems are rare among primitive groups but common among modernized Eskimos and Indians. Based on his experience, many tuberculosis patients improved when returned to a primitive lifestyle and diet. Institutions caring for orphans and educating Eskimo and Indian children offer insights into health. The Eklutna Institution, north of Anchorage, prepares and stores dried salmon for winter, showing the benefits of a good diet. Mixed-blood Eskimos and Indians at this school had dental caries affecting 14.6% of teeth. At Seward's Jesse Lee home, mostly modernized Eskimos and Indians had a 27.5% incidence of dental caries, despite good hygiene and nutrition. A large portion of students at such institutions have died from tuberculosis, a significant factor in reducing Indian and Eskimo populations. Nutrition plays a key role in lowering defenses against tuberculosis, contributing to high mortality rates. Evaluating the influence of environments on racial and tribal development is simpler when studying contemporary remnants of primitive racial stocks. Burials from the pre-Columbian era reveal no tooth decay, dental arch deformity, or facial form changes due to inadequate nutrition, unlike modernized counterparts. Isolated groups in the cypress swamps maintain physical excellence and high immunity to dental caries, contrasting with modernized Florida Indians who face high dental caries and dental arch deformities. Modern Indian groups in Albuquerque, New Mexico, also display similar health issues. Other studies on Indian groups, recent burials, and museum collections support these findings. Primitive Indians had near-zero tooth decay on native diets, whereas modernized Indians showed high dental caries rates. A summary of dental caries percentages across different groups illustrates the impact of modernization on health. Primitive Indians showed low rates, Pelly Mountain, 0.16%, Juneau, 0.00%, Florida Pre-Columbian, 0.00%, Florida Seminoles, 4%. In contrast, modernized Indians had much higher rates, Telegraph Creek, 25.5%, Alaska Frontier, 40.0%, Mohawk Institute, 17%, Brantford Reservation Public School, 28.5%, Brantford Reservation Hospital, 23.2%, Tuscarora Reservation, 38.0%, Winnipeg Lake Reservation, 39.1%, North Vancouver Reservation, 36.9%, Craigflower Indian Reservation, 48.5%, Ketchikan, 46.6%, Juneau Hospital, 39.1%, Sheldon Jackson School, 53.7%, Sitka, 35.6%, Eklutna, 14.6%, Jesse Lee Home, Seward, 27.6%, and Florida Seminoles, 40%. The diets of primitive groups varied with location and climate, while modernized groups uniformly consumed typical commercial, white man's foods. Primitive groups consistently displayed well-formed faces and dental arches, reflecting their tribal patterns. However, the new generation, after adopting modern foods, exhibited significant changes in facial and dental arch forms. Similar to other primitive races, Indians recognize that their degeneration is influenced by contact with white civilization. Many Seminole Indians in the Florida Everglades and Cypress Swamp are isolated and distrustful of outsiders due to past treaty violations. The assistance of their own tribe member and a trusted white man was crucial in conducting detailed studies. An article titled, "Tribes Fed Up, Seek Solitude, Indians Dislike Civilization, Ask Land Barred to White Men," reports widespread discontent among Oklahoma's Indian tribes. With 5 tribes seeking new, secluded tribal lands away from white civilization due to increasing population, decreasing lands, and poor economic conditions. The Bureau of Indian Affairs is considering the possibility of providing new lands where Indians can hunt and fish as their ancestors did. The discontent is exemplified by a delegation, led by Jack Gouge, a Creek Indian, which voiced these concerns to Indian Commissioner John Collier. An organization of about 1,000 Indians, known as the Four Mothers, representing the Creeks, Choctaws, Cherokees, and Chickasaws, is pressing these demands. The Seminoles of Oklahoma are negotiating with the Mexican government for tribal lands there. These tribes are referred to as civilized due to their high cultural achievements in their original eastern tribal lands. Displacement to Oklahoma occurred when their lands became valuable, and further fragmentation occurred with the discovery of oil at the turn of the century. Indian Bureau officials expressed bitterness over the numerous treaty violations by the white man. Approximately 300 treaties have been signed with Indians, and almost all have been violated. For the advancement of science and human well-being, it would be beneficial to allow these tribes to live according to the accumulated wisdom of their cultures in isolated conditions. Preserving their culture would preserve their valuable heritage. Today, the greatest legacy of the white man is the accumulated wisdom of the human race.